but he told me that if I take too long, he'll go ahead and sign me up on my behalf, so we will be back. But when Lee and I first started coming to Christ, we lived in Southwest Colorado. We lived down in Durango. Now, my parents still lived in Conifer, so we would come and visit. We would visit for weekends, holidays, family get-togethers. But every time we would visit, we would go and worship at Conifer Church of Christ. Now, at that time, Wayne Berger was the preacher there at Conifer. And there was something different about Wayne. When we first met him, he treated us with a sense of genuine love. We felt different when we were around him. He didn't act like most people in the world, but rather there was a gentleness. His actions, his speech, how he made our family feel was different. And for some reason, he always seemed to have the exact sermon that we needed to hear that day. And so Lee and I would leave worship. We would feel loved. We would feel encouraged. We would be excited. And it was amazing how he made us feel. And I actually look up to Wayne Berger as an example of how we are to walk. The way he interacts with the world, this helps me understand how God has called us to be. To put it simply, God has called us to be different. He's made the call. We heard the call, and we believe in the gospel of Christ. And because of this, we need to understand that we are no longer of this world. But rather, since we are no longer of this world, we must shun fleshly desires. And since we are not of this world, we are to shine with honorable conduct. And since we're not of this world, we are to submit for the Lord's sake. If we can learn to act in the manner that the gospel has called on us, then our actions will be noticeable to others. And it's because they're the actions of a spiritually minded person, not of a worldly minded person. And that leads us to our first point today. Since we are not of this world, we must shun fleshly desires. Now, it's easy enough to say, but to put into practice, it can be hard. In fact, it can be brutal. I would love to say that when we're first baptized, all of our temptation leaves us. But the harsh reality is when we're first baptized, that's when the fight truly begins. That's when we take the stance and when we decide that we are going to start denying self, picking up the cross daily, and following Christ. And that's exactly what Peter is speaking of in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. So please turn with me to 1 Peter chapter 2. Now, verse 11 is actually one of two petition verbs in the book of 1 Peter. And it reads, "Beloved, I urge you, as aliens and strangers, to abstain from fleshly lusts, which wage war against the soul." Now, there's two parts to this verse that I really love. The first section we see is that we're not of this world. We are strangers. We are aliens in this world. Yes, we're in it, and we are to be in it to save souls. But we're not of it. We're not supposed to be conformed to it. We're not supposed to be at home in it. This is not our home. And so the wording that Peter uses at the end of this verse really strikes a nerve for me. From fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. We all know the feeling, and when we're dealing with temptation, when we're dealing with that temptation, sometimes it feels actually physical, that there's a physical draw to sin. But it wages war against the soul. And we all have to fight against that feeling. In fact, as it's written in Philippians 3:18 through 19, "For many walk, of whom I often told you, and now tell you even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, and whose God is their appetite, and whose glory is their shame, and who sets their minds on earthly things." The phrase there, "whose God is their appetite," for the longest time when I was still growing in Christ, I thought that was talking about physically eating. I genuinely thought when I overate, I sinned. But what I've recently learned that there are actually two trains of thought. There's one camp that believes that this is talking about those who are trying to still bind the old complex Old Testament eating laws. But then there's the other train of thought, and this is the camp that I dwell in right now, is that this verse is talking about the internal desire or the fleshly appetite for sin. And so we've all felt that feeling. We know what that feeling is like in the pit of our stomach when the flesh truly wants to do something sinful. And that's the reason why I love the last part of that verse, is because there are times where it feels like there is an internal battle raging on inside of us. On one side, we want to obey God. We want to be obedient to all his commandments, but there's another part of us that wants to commit sin, the fleshly desire of the world. And so these two conflicting desires clash inside of us every single day. In fact, this verse reminds me of an old Native American story, the Native American story of two wolves. Now, if you've heard of the story, I'm sorry to report it's not actually a traditional Native American story. It's written by Western authors. But it's the story of two wolves. This young boy goes up to his grandfather, who's sitting off to the side, and he says, "Grandfather, what are you doing?" And the grandfather says, "I'm watching a fight, a terrible fight between two wolves." The grandson looks around and says, "Where are these wolves?" The grandfather says, "They're inside of me. One wolf is white as snow. He is good, and he is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The other wolf is black as night, and he is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, lies, and pride." The grandfather then puts his hand on the young boy's shoulder and says, "The same fight is going on inside of you." The young boy sat there for a few minutes, started to actually get a little nervous, and asks, "But grandfather, which wolf will win?" The grandfather replies, "The one that you feed." And so we need to be mindful. The parable of the two wolves is one of my favorite illustrations of the fight that all of us have inside of us. And the ending of that parable reminds me of verse 11 so well, that we have this battle. We have this flesh waging war against the soul. And as Christians, we all want the Spirit to have control. We all want to have spiritual decisions. And that's the exact plea that Peter is giving us here today. We need to abstain from the fleshly lust. For if we feed in to the fleshly desires of the world, if we let that occur, then pretty soon the fleshly lust, those desires will take the reins of our heart. And all of our decisions will be dictated on those desires instead of spiritual concerns. But if we remain conscious, if we remain in the Word and we are fed by the Word daily, then we will control those fleshly desires and we will shun those fleshly desires. But when we have spiritual concerns reigning, then it's easier to obey what is written in the following verses, which leads us to our second point. We are not of this world, so shine with honorable conduct. Now, I don't know about everyone here, but for me personally, it's hard sometimes to always be acting as a faithful Christian, to have every single one of my decisions, every single one of my actions be representing my faith in Christ. And there are times where I've failed, where I didn't build other people up. There are times when I could have evangelized and helped those who are in need, and I failed. Or comments I've made, things I've said where I regret saying it. There are times where I just lost that battle. Going back to our first point, I let the fleshly desires win instead of having spiritual concerns. And it worries me when my actions and decisions don't reflect being a Christian. And that's why verse 12 is so convicting to me. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the things in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. So we need to ask ourselves, what does it mean to have excellent behavior? What does that look like? Does that mean we get it right 100% of the time? No, we're still human. We're still people. But it does mean that we are striving to have the characteristics of Christ. It goes back to our first point that we shun fleshly desires and we strive for the spiritual concerns. And so that when the Gentiles see us, when the people of the world see us, they can notice that we're different. There's something different about us. Now, when they notice there's something different about us, there will be two reactions. There will be those Gentiles that we see in verse 12 that kind of seem to want to just look for a reason. The moment we mess up, they're like, up, look, you see? They're frauds. Those who want to slander us, those who want to say that we have anger on our heart, that we want people to go to hell. But I want to focus on the other side. There is another reason why we must keep our behavior excellent among people of the world. And that's so that when they see our good behavior, when they see our good works, our good deeds, they begin to get curious. Now that's actually exactly what happened to me in my experience. When I was in my early 20s, I had a friend who I had known for a few years. He and I went to college together. We ended up being roommates together, and we actually ended up working at the same company together. So he and I had quite the past. Well, both of us grew up worldly. We both grew up, so when we were in college, we were going to parties. When we were roommates, we were still going to parties. We were doing worldly things. But when he and his girlfriend, who's now his wife, started going to Christ, I noticed there was something different about them. He didn't need to drink anymore. He didn't need to go to parties to have fun, but rather he seemed to be able to find a way to just enjoy life. And I took notice of it. He seemed happier, he seemed calmer. And admittedly, at this point in time, just as he's making these changes, I really didn't like the person I saw in the mirror. I didn't like the things I was saying. I didn't like decisions I was making. I was being fairly successful at work, and I had a great group of friends, but I was still at an emotionally low point in my life. And I kept thinking, as I'm dwelling in this low point, I kept thinking of my friend Kyle, how he was happier, how I enjoyed being around him. And so I started asking questions. Why is this? I wanted to know what the reason was. And thankfully, by God's providence, Kyle and I ended up having to map noxious invasive weeds on a government property that was about 2,000 to 3,000 acres. It had trees, slopes, rocks, hills. We couldn't use equipment, our normal equipment, to map it. So Kyle and I spent the next month walking around in the middle of nowhere together alone. Talk about the perfect time for me to start asking questions. But none of that would have happened. I wouldn't have been curious. I wouldn't have wanted to know if it wasn't for Kyle's actions, how he was interacting with the world, the difference that he made just with being different. And one of the biggest things for me was he was so much more enjoyable to be around than other people. When I was with Kyle, I didn't have to worry about getting insulted left and right. I didn't have to stay on guard, but I could just trust him. And so that's what we see that's written in verse 12. We need to have our behavior be excellent among the Gentiles. Now, the reason that we saw in this verse is for those people of the world who want to find our flaws, who want to insult us, slander us, come attack us. But I want us to also focus on those Gentiles, those people of the world who want to know the truth, who see our actions and want to actually understand why we're so different. So how do we make sure that our actions are excellent among the Gentiles? Going back to point 1, we don't partake in fleshly desires. We abstain from those desires. But also, we act different. We don't go around slandering other people. We keep our behavior excellent. We don't go around talking bad about our government, but instead we focus on building up one another. We focus on building up and edifying the people that we're around. Now we need to do everything to make sure that when we part ways with that person, they saw Christ living in us. But when they start asking questions, we also will have the understanding and knowledge to be able to explain to them why we believe what we believe, to explain the gospel of Christ to them. But also when we focus on having our behavior be excellent among the Gentiles, then it's going to be easier for us to have a submissive mindset. Now that leads us to our last point today. Since we are not of this world, we must submit for the Lord's sake. Now, as Americans, it can be extremely hard for that word submit to even be in our vocabulary. I mean, our country was formed and founded on fighting against the British government, on fighting against that control. We see ourselves as free people who have the right and obligation to fight against such controlling governments. But when it comes to being a Christian, yes, if the government tries to tell us that we can't read our Bibles, that we can't come to worship, that we can't sing praises to God, and that we can't tell other people about God, we are to obey God first and foremost. As the apostles showed us in Acts 5:29, when Peter and the apostles answered, we must obey God rather than men. But I want us to be mindful that we can take that freedom mentality too far, and we can actually end up being opposed to the gospel. For as it is written in verses 13 through 17, submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of the foolish men. Act as free men, and do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondslaves of God. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. So starting in verse 13, it says every human institution. It doesn't leave us much grace, does it? It doesn't leave us much wiggle room. Based on this verse, it's not, well, I don't agree with what the Democrats have said, so I don't really have to listen to them. Or I don't agree with what the Republicans do, so I don't really have to listen to them. I don't agree with what the Green Party believes, so I'm not going to listen. I don't agree with fill in the blank. Now, we have to be mindful because at that time when this letter was written, it was, well, I don't really agree with the Romans who were killing them, who were persecuting them. It's important for us to remember and understand the rulers that they had at that time when this letter was written. Because when we understand what they were undergoing, what those Christians, what the persecution they were dealing with, we sadly don't have much excuse not to be able to be submissive to the human institutions. Now, it's hard. I know it's hard to take this mentality when it comes to the government, especially when it comes to paying taxes, when it comes to areas that negatively impact us. But this reminds me of what Jesus said to the Pharisees in Matthew 22:15 through 22. And it reads, Then the Pharisees went and plotted together how they might trap him in what he said. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God in truth, and defer to no one, for you are not partial to any. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to give a poll tax to Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their malice and said, Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the poll tax. And they brought him a denarius. And he said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said to him, Caesar's. Then he said, Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Now this makes me think of one human institution that we have today. And so for the sake of not getting political, we'll talk about this one human institution that almost everyone dislikes, the IRS. So paying taxes is usually Americans' number one biggest complaint. If it's not the fact that we have to pay taxes, it's how complex they've made the whole system. We have to comb over our financial data for the entire year, submit it, and then we have to wait for them to tell us if we're right or wrong. Now, this can take up to 4 years for them to tell us if we're right or wrong. It can be frustrating. In fact, when I was young, when I was younger, I started completing my own taxes. One year I forgot to incorporate a 1099 document that I didn't think was that much money, but the IRS disagreed. So 2 years later, Lee and I are actually about to pack up. We're about to head to California so I can meet her family for the first time. And I get a letter from the IRS. It was for my taxes 2 years ago. They were saying, you owe about $1,000 to $2,000 extra. I don't remember the exact quantity, but I remember I was in shock. At that point in time, I didn't have a lot of breathing room with my financial situation. So that was rough. Now, I was worldly. And I'm going to be honest, I reacted poorly. I was mad. How could they be okay with waiting 2 years? They've had my taxes for 2 years, and now they're telling me I'm wrong? Now they're telling me I owe them money? How are they okay with taking this long and then saying, oh, you got to pay this right now? I wanted to call them up. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to curse them out, yell at them. I wanted to call them every name in the book. But the harsh reality is that not a human institution? Is that not a branch of the United States government? Now I have to switch mindset here. Did the IRS do me wrong? In this specific situation, I was the one who forgot the 1099 document. So if I was able to submit and have more grace towards this human institution, I would have thought logically about, they're not committing any evil against me. They're not being wicked. They're telling me I'm wrong, and I was. I would have been able to logically think through the situation. But I also want us to take a moment and think about how many times do you think the IRS workers get a phone call and the person treats them with grace, treats them with mercy, kindness? Not very often, I doubt. But if we can have that mindset, that submissive mindset that treats others with that grace, that mercy, even when it's financially impacting us. So basically doing everything opposite of how I reacted, we would stand out. We would be different. Those workers at the IRS would start to wonder, why are these people, I just told them they owe $2,000. Why are they being so nice to me? Why are they different? Why aren't they screaming at me? And so if we take this attitude for the Lord's sake, not for our sake, for God's sake, it can be an opportunity to still spread the gospel of Christ. And so all these points that we discussed today lead to the concept that since we are not of this world, we are to be different. We're to act different. We are to shun that fleshly desire. We are to shine with honorable conduct, and we are to submit for the Lord's sake. And it all wraps into itself. When we abstain from that fleshly desire and focus on the spiritual concerns, on grace, on mercy, on all the characteristics of the good wolf that we discussed earlier, then it's going to be easier for us to have that excellent behavior among the people of the world in hopes that they start asking questions. And when we have that excellent behavior among all people, then it will be easier for us to submit. Even as Americans, it will be easier for us to submit to human institutions. We're not going to want to slander the IRS. We're not going to want to bring that negativity, but rather be building up, edifying those who are around us. And all of it is to show that Christ is alive and well within us for the Lord's sake. When we truly learn to apply this in our lives, then we can be that encouragement to others. We can be that Wayne Berger, that Kyle Click, who in my experiences were truly learned to act different, to be different. So this morning, if you're struggling with sin, if you're struggling with the fleshly desires of the world, or if you're struggling with how you're acting among people of the world, if you're upset that you're not acting in a manner that you should be, not setting that good example for the people of the world, or even if you're struggling having the submissive mindset towards human institutions, then I ask that you please come forward, or if you're uncomfortable coming forward, please meet with us in the back, and we can talk privately, but please come forward as we stand and sing the song of invitation.